What's up YouTube? Welcome to today's video, and we are going to go over the one aspect that is going to make or break Diablo 4, and this is pretty much the longevity of the game and how long players will play it every single season. Now, when they gave an interview to IGN, they mentioned they wanted you to play its endgame for thousands of hours. Now, for a lot of people wondering, how long have I actually played Path of Exile for? I think I've probably played Path of Exile around 5 to 10k hours, roughly. So, Diablo 4 does aim for you to play the game that long, but it does matter what do they want you to do after you finish the campaign. And there are a lot of things to do. Now, Diablo 4 is the first Diablo game that they had a closed beta specifically for the endgame. Now, a lot of the stuff was not really leaked. I did see some NDA footage, and there were a lot of missing assets, and it does seem like most of the people were running some sort of dungeon. There were some bosses here and there, but it didn't really give us a good grasp of what exactly the endgame is. However, the developers did post a little bit of an update detailing what you can do during the endgame, and there are a lot of different things. And I do think one of the main aspects of the endgame that kind of gets thrown under the bus is that there is going to be some sort of PvP. Now, in a game like Path of Exile, there is Capture the Flag PvP, 2v2 arena, 3v3 arena, and rated arena even. However, no one plays it because the PvP combat is god-awful. But Path of Exile's endgame is something that a lot of people try to compare all ARPGs to. But it is a very, very unfair comparison. Path of Exile has been in development for 10 plus years, I think, maybe even longer, and they have added more and more endgame every single season, constantly improving the game. And it does have such a diverse endgame. There's bosses, there is crafting, there's people who flip the market, there's people who scam the players, and there's even people who, run a third-party Discord for the game. Their possibilities are endless. There's people who can do anything they want. Now, Diablo 3's endgame consists of doing Greater Rift leaderboards while farming for Infinite Paragon that gives you tiny amounts of character power. So Diablo 3's endgame is very, very narrowly defined, and that is why most people play a season for around a weekend. Now, the endgame is extremely important, and I do define the endgame as what you do after you finish the campaign, because it is what is going to determine how long our players going to play the season for. Are they going to play it for 1 week? Are they going to play it for 1 weekend? Are they going to play it for 1 day? Or are they going to play it for 1 month? Now, first off, in order to understand the endgame in Diablo 4, we have to know what are world tiers. Now, this is something that should be familiar for anyone who has played Diablo games in the past. And this is kind of a difficulty levels. Now, Path of Exile used to have difficulty levels in the campaign known as, I think, normal, ruthless, and then merciless, but then they got rid of the difficulty levels, and the difficulty levels, in my opinion, are kind of an interesting way of making the game harder. So initially you have difficulty 1 and 2, known as world tier 1 and 2, and that is adventurer and veteran. Veteran is meant for more experienced players of ARPGs. Now, when you finish the campaign, I think the world tier 3 opens up, and then in order to progress to further world tiers, you will have to kill a series of bosses, and I think it's a specific dungeon. Now, all in all, I think there's like 150 dungeons in the game. So I think in that dungeon, there's going to be a pretty hard boss for you to take on. And once you take on that boss, you'll be able to unlock the next world tier. And then I think there might be 5 world tiers total. I'm not really sure. I think in one of the initial interviews, they said there's going to be 5. But from a lot of the screenshots I saw from the closed beta, they only had 4 world tiers at the moment. Now, higher difficulty level means that you get more loot, you get more gold, and more experience. And this is going to be one of the first parts of the end game, which is progressing your campaign and doing the dungeons and fighting the series of bosses you need in order to unlock the highest world tier difficulty to give you the most loot. And you can see here, ancestral items and new unique items can drop. So there's definitely going to be some uniques and high-end items that are going to be gated by the world tier that you have access to. Now, next up, we have the bulk of the end game, which is going to be running Nightmare Dungeons. Now, Diablo 4 has a very, very interesting open world system where you can go anywhere and you can do any dungeon just by traveling to it. So you pretty much find a waypoint on your map and then you go find the corresponding dungeon you want to do, and then you go to it, and then you run the dungeon, and then you actually get some sort of aspect that allows you to take a legendary affix and put it onto any rare item. Now, those are just normal dungeons. When you finish when you get to tier 3 of the world tier difficulty, you unlock something called a nightmare dungeon. Now, nightmare dungeons are just more challenging dungeons as they add an extra affix. Now, some of these extra affixes, or afflictions as you may call them, can have stuff like double boss, double the amount of enemies, invisible enemies until you get attacked by them, and then you're probably going to have some stuff like enemies do more damage, enemies are faster. So you can kind of think of this as Path of Exile maps that have a role on them. So sometimes you have a role in Path of Exile where you'll have increased damage or minus max. So it's going to be something very, very similar to that. Now, the difficulty of the dungeon is going to depend on the level of the nightmare sigil in your inventory, and you can actually craft these nightmare sigils. And I think this nightmare sigil gets upgraded when you complete a dungeon of the previous tier. So that's kind of similar through the Greater Rift system. Now, currently, the highest tier dungeon, I think it goes up to tier 100, can have 5 afflictions, and I think you craft the sigils through the crafting vendor. And it does require like sigil powder. I'm not really sure how you get it. I think it's maybe through doing like world quests or the Tree of Whispers or something like that. But basically, you can see this one requires world tier 4, and it will put on 5 afflictions total. So that's the amount of affixes that's going to be on the dungeon. Now, doing these dungeons at a higher difficulty level is going to reward you with better loot, better legendary, and the highest tier of gear. Now, next up, we have something known as Helltide Events, and these are new region-wide events that unlock after World Tier 3 difficulty. So you can see a lot of these events or endgame activities will unlock after you finish the campaign in World Tier 1 and 2. Now, these Helltides spawn a bunch of monsters, and these monsters drop a currency called Cinders. And Cinders are a new currency used to open Helltide chests spread across the region. And these Helltide chests are going to contain some valuable gear for certain slots. And the nice part about this mechanic is that the Cinders actually drop when you die. So maybe there could be potentially some sort of PvP. I'm not really sure, but it's going to have a very, very tense atmosphere to it because you're going to be scared if you die because you have to go retrieve the Cinders, similar to how Elden Ring or Dark Souls games does the souls. So it's really going to be hard to really understand exactly how important this is going to be for the end game, because a lot of this also depends on how strong the item is that drops, because for a lot of these events, you're trying to get as good of an item as possible, and if the Helltide doesn't drop items with enough item power, it's not going to have enough item budget to really beat the best items in the game. So next up, we have something called a Whispers of the Dead, and you can kind of think of this as a makeshift bounty board. So what this thing is that there's going to be a tree of Whisper that will send you on tasks throughout the sanctuary. So it's kind of like world quests or world tasks in that aspect. So after completing the quest or task that you're sent on from the tree, you'll receive experience, gold, and a new type of currency known as Grim Favors. Now, Grim Favors you can exchange at the Tree of Whispers for loot and experience, and these Whispers or tasks that you will have to do will rotate frequently and offer different sets of rewards depending on the time of day and where the tasks are actually located at. Now, the main part about this, same with the Helltides that we mentioned, is what exactly are the items that are going to drop from these events and these tasks. Will the item that we get from exchanging the Grim Favors be something that would be comparable to a high-level nightmare dungeon? A lot of these questions are unanswered, and they honestly are very, very vital of understanding which endgame activity we as players will be spamming the most. Now, next up, we have something that I do think that Diablo 4 will probably distinguish itself from a lot of other ARPGs like Last Epoch or PoE. Now, these are designated PvP zones, and this is something that Path of Exile does not have unless you count Battle Royale as that. But in these PvP zones, players will collect Seeds of Hatred. Now, this is going to be like a PvEvP scenario from what they described it as. We'll be killing demons to collect these Seeds of Hatred. But these Seeds of Hatred, like the Cinders, are going to drop when you die. And when you get these Seeds of Hatred, you bring it to this altar of extraction, and you convert it to red dust. Now, these red dust will not be lost if you die, but the seeds of hatred will, drop when you die. Now, in terms of the rewards for this, by the way they described it in the developer update, they made it sound like it's mainly going to be cosmetics and mount ornamental rewards. So we're going to have to see if there's actually going to be something called PvP gear that's going to be best for PvE builds. Now, I do think that this is one aspect of the endgame that will probably get kind of understated, because I truly believe that there is a lot of people out there who truly enjoy PvP, even though most people think of an ARPG as a strictly PvE game. And this is what actually gets people to play more, because they want to get their character as strong as possible and they want to kill actual human enemies. Now, lastly, there is going to be an endgame boss, and they did mention this, that the level cap is 100 in this game, and there is going to be a level 100 boss waiting for us at the end game. When we get through all of the world tiers, there's going to be some super Diablo or Lilith type of encounter, and it's going to be really, really intriguing as to what exactly this boss is. So for Path of Exile, you can think of this as like Uber Elder back in the day when it was considered the final boss. So technically beating the Diablo 4 endgame would be getting to a level 100, finishing off all your renown in Paragon, and killing this level 100 boss. Now, I don't think there's any details about this boss. There's no beta leaks or anything, so no one really has any idea what this boss actually looks like or its abilities are. Now, there's also going to be world bosses. Now, this is kind of copied over from Lost Ark. They did give you a sneak peek of the world boss, and this is from the open beta, or not open beta, the closed beta this weekend called Ashava. I think there's going to be 3 world bosses at the start, and this is another, and this is like the same. I think, oh yeah, these 2 bosses are the same. But basically, these bosses you can fight with up to 12 people, and there's going to be a lot of attacks you have to dodge. And after you kill it, you're going to be rewarded with some legendaries, and I think maybe some ways to add sockets to your gear. Not really entirely sure, but this is another one of the endgame facets that Diablo 4 will offer us. Now, overall, what do I actually think about the endgame? I think the endgame is... I don't even know what to say. I think the endgame is pretty standard. Like, from what I see, it's mostly just going to be spamming dungeons and trying to progress your world tier and difficulty, and then once you get to the final boss, you kill it, and then I imagine at that point you'll see what items you have, and you'll see what you can re-roll, because you'll have certain gear that's going to be good for certain classes, as you'll have the legendary or aspects that you can use. Now, regardless of how much endgame there actually is, I do think that the game is a very, very big game at launch. There's going to be a lot of things to explore. Even in the beta, it's only Act 1, so there's still so much unknown about the endgame, unless someone wants to leak some of the stuff from the closed beta NDA endgame. But the thing is that the beta probably didn't even have everything that Diablo 4 has to offer. So I do think that for the first few seasons, at the very least, the game is going to have very, very good longevity just because of the discovery aspect of it. People are going to find new builds. They're going to find the dungeons. They're going to have to learn a lot of things about the game. And I do think that in the start, the end game will be perfectly fine to be able to play Diablo 4 for probably weeks at a time at the season launch. Now, I do think later on, once the game gets more solved, it is more important for Blizzard to consistently add stuff every season. Now, every season or league is pretty much what Path of Exile did to add all of that stuff to the end game. And this is really a modular live service game in the sense that this game will continually change. There's going to be more and more end game. There's going to be more and more end game bosses. And at this point, the Nightmare Dungeons are the main focus of the end game. And I do think that every single run is going to be slightly different. I hope it doesn't come down to just fishing for the right afflictions for the dungeons, because I could definitely see that happening. Kind of like how people were doing Diablo 3 and fishing for the right boss in the greater rifts. Now, I do think that if PvP is good, it's going to have a huge incentive for players to keep improving their gear for tiny incremental gains. And this is a quote from the Diablo 4 game designer. The intention of seasons is to create really exciting reasons for you to want to come back to Sanctuary and have a different experience each time. And we're going to have a different experience because the end game is going to change as time goes on. And yeah, let me know down in the comments below what part of the endgame are you most excited for. Are you excited for the PvP, the nightmare dungeons, the level 100 boss, the world bosses, or doing some of the bounties on the Tree of Whispers? But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more mirrors, divines, and gold than me. And be sure to like and subscribe. And see you next time. Bye.